I'm Joanne Banko, author, designer, and sewing educator. And I'd like to show you how to make some fancy pajamas for yourself today. Some embroidered pajamas with some Asian details. We're gonna specifically work on the border design for the pajama pants and for the cuffs on the pajama jacket. So let's talk just a little bit about the fabric. This is a satiny type fabric. It actually has a little bit of a brushed back on it, so it's very comfortable to wear. But this kind of fabric can be a little bit tricky to embroider on. So to beef it up, I added another layer underneath, and I actually used a little bit of flannel, washed and dried thoroughly so that it's pre-shrunk. It adds a little bit of thickness to it, but I kind of like that little bit of a quilted look. If you want something thinner, you can choose muslin. You just want to add a little bit of a beefed up layer. Even a lightweight interfacing will work. So choose a design from your design collection, pick a pattern. You can use a pattern that it has specific, authentic Asian detailing like the one I have, or you can take a pattern and transform it. We'll give you some ideas for that as well. So let's go over to the machine and let me show you how I created that beautiful border embroidery design. When we set the design up, I've got a special feature here where I can turn this into multiple designs very quickly and very easily. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to touch Edit. I'm going to touch the Repeat key, and I'm going to simply add a design to the top and then add a design to the bottom. Now watch where the magic happens here. I've got another key that's going to space out my design. I'm going to space that, and then I'm going to put it in the center. So now I'm ready to actually go to the embroidery screen and embroider that design on my fabric that has already been quilted. We'll talk about that in another minute. I'll give you some clues on that. And I'm going to add a little bit of stabilizer. I've chosen a border hoop, and I've actually sized my embroidery design and my fabric piece so that it's a little bit larger than my pattern. And that's very important to do that when you are embroidering on something. You want to cut it oversized and then embroider. Use your pattern as a guide and cut out your final piece after it's all stitched. You'll see that in a minute as well. So I'm going to slide this right on. I've already got my first color selected, so I'm just going to simply go ahead and lower my presser foot, press the start button, and if you notice on the screen of the machine, something really interesting and very helpful happened. The machine sorted my colors for me. It's a border design, so it's going to stitch all the green and then all of the next color and all the next color. That'll save me a lot of color changes. Everything's going to be evenly spaced as well. Now, if you don't have a feature like this on your machine, you can go ahead and measure and mark. You can use templates. Use whatever method you're used to using for spacing out the design. While that stitches, I'm going to show you a few more details here. How did I get all of these nice straight lines? It's a quilting effect. We call this channel quilting. It's a fun technique to use for all kinds of different styled fabrics, but again, I did it mostly just to marry those two layers of fabric together and beef up that satin fabric so I could get a nice quality embroidery design when I was done. So how did I do it? Well, I start out by marking one line, and you could use that with chalk or a removable marking pencil, but what I like to use is the low-tack tape, and I'll mark my first line and then stitch right along that. Now, what kind of foot do you use, and what do you use for spacing? Well, you've got multiple choices. You certainly have an ordinary presser foot like this, and you also likely have the option of using a spacer bar. I could also use just the presser foot width, but the spacer bar allows me to slide it and actually create the rows that are evenly spaced according to how much spacing I want it to be. I've also got an option on certain machines for using a type of a walking foot that's actually a digital dual feed foot. That's ideal for feeding these satin layers against the flannel and makes everything nice and smooth and flat and even. And I simply do all one direction diagonally and then turn crisscross and do at a 45-degree angle opposite direction. So we'll go ahead and leave the machine for just a minute. I'm going to show you another couple details here. When you saw the pajamas, you saw those pretty loops that were up for the closure. And I created those by cutting bias strips of fabric, then sewing the bias strips. There's a very specific way to do this. I'm gonna tell you to make sure to download the project instructions. We'll give you step by step for that. Once you've stitched it and trimmed it, then you use a special loop turner, slide that up, and then slide it all the way down, and wow, in seconds, you've got beautiful little bias tubing that you can use to create these great looking Asian style loops. Very, very nice finish, very special look, especially when you find buttons to match. So let's take a look at the embroidered piece that I already have finished. I'm gonna flip back up over here to the table, and I'm gonna tell you just a little bit about what you do when you're all done. You're gonna take your pattern. This particular one actually is for my cuff for my sleeves. The pattern piece that I have here was for my pant leg. But you can get an idea there. You just simply center it right over the top, cut it to size, and sew your pattern together. Sew your band cuff to your pajama pants, to your sleeve. If you want to modify a standard pattern, you could do that very easily as well. Just decide what depth you want your cuff to be, add a seam allowance at each cut edge, and then you could very easily, you see, cut this band, cut it to size, and then sew it to your pajama bottom. Now, what if you don't have embroidery capability? Well, there's always other options. Sewing is all about options. It's all about doing what works for you. So take a look at the second pair of pajama pants, and you see that pretty little band. I just selected two coordinating fabrics, sewed the two together, and created a very interesting look. These pajamas are so much fun to wear. I encourage you to go to the project, download, visit the website. You'll get all the directions, all the tips and techniques for making your own fancy pajamas with some Asian flair.